Hello and welcome to this a special members content where we give our members on Patreon and YouTube early access to some of our content. Today we're going to be talking about a very interesting article from the Times of Israel that's dated to July 19th, 2023, which concerns a particular cave that they've been excavating at Beit Shemesh. And the article is entitled Beit Shemesh's Gate to Sheol. And it is fascinating, absolutely fascinating. So I'm here again with my producer. We're going to talk about this article because it is really interesting.
The exciting thing about it is this cave was known. It started discovery back in 1873 by some British explorers, but it's just recently had these new discoveries that have given the cave this entirely different context.
Yeah. The byline is Oil lamps and fragments of human skull lead archaeologists to believe Teoman Cave was used for necromancy or communication with the dead.
Some 1,700 years ago.
Yes, and this cave has a very interesting history. Now, as my producer pointed out here, that it was first explored in modern times in 1873, but the history of the cave seems to go back a lot further. Now, recently, when they've done an excavation here, they have found 3 human skulls, 120 oil lamps, ancient pottery, and weapons from the Bronze Age, which date some 2,000 years before the oil lamps. Now, the oil lamps date to roughly the, at the latest, the 3rd century AD. So, 1700 BC, people are already depositing Bronze Age weapons there. But what's really of the interest here is the necromancy. And as I said, for those of you who don't know, necromancy is a magical practice where people communicate with the dead. And that's what's really fascinating about this.
And it's not just the fact that human skulls were found. The lamps play a part too.
Yes, they do.
And that comes up later in the article,
Yeah.
and we'll get to that.
Yeah. Now, we have to, sort of leading up to this, that there's actually a whole history of this cave that led up to its use as, say, a oracle to contact the dead. The article states that, quote, the whole area underwent a radical transformation following the crash of the Bar Kokhba revolt. And the lead archaeologist on this is Boaz Zizu of Bar-Ilan University, who's been studying the cave since 2009.
He's the main author of the study.
Yeah, he's the main author of the study. And the study has been, even though we're taking this out of the Times of Israel article, it was published this week in Harvard Theological Review.
There was a second author along with that.
Yeah, there is.
And I'll let you pronounce his name.
Dr. Eitan Klein of the Israeli Antiquities Authority. There's also a third one, Professor Amos Frumkin, as well, who also worked on this. But one of the interesting things is that this cave had actually been, it's relatively well explored. It was a popular spelunking site from the 1920s to the 1970s. But no extensive survey had been carried out until Zizu had started this in 2009. So it's one of those things that's sort of been, it was well known in the area, but rediscovered by archaeologists. And when it was rediscovered, they used a combined team of researchers. I mean, this is a big effort.
Mm-hmm.
They are using the Martin Zuzu Department of Land of Israel Studies and Archaeology at Bar-Ilan University, the Israel Cave Research Center, the Hebrew University, the Israeli Antiquities Authority, and the Nature and Parks Authority. So there's a lot of departments here involved in this study.
And one of the reasons this was formerly a Jewish area,
Mm-hmm.
and then the article states following the vacuum created in the region, Roman pagan elements entered the area.
Yeah, and that's where this is getting to.
Yeah, they're thinking that some of what they're finding beyond in this new discovery could have been performed by those Roman pagans.
Yes, and that's where they're really getting to in this. Now, they did find hordes of gold and silver coins, which
Hordes of coins. Hordes of coins are fun to find.
Oh, they are fun to find.
Everybody wants to find hordes of coins.
They do.
We all have that little bit of dragon in us who says, I want my own horde of coins.
Yes. They don't always tell you a lot archaeologically if you find them in a horde.
No, but
You're
they sure are fun to find.
They are fun to find. You're almost better off finding coins onesie-twosie for archaeological purposes.
It gives dating to the site.
Yeah. But hordes of coins are fun to find.
And it tends to say it's probably a site more for ritualistic purposes, because practical sites, nobody leaves their hoards out in public.
Well, okay. We do have to understand that those coins date to the Bar Kokhba revolt. Okay? So, this actually happens fairly frequently, where a horde of coins on the eve of invasion are hidden so that the hider can come back later and recover them. And then something happens to the guy hiding the coins, and they never come back for them. So that seems to be what's happened here, is the cave was used during the Bar Kokhba revolt to hide masses of wealth that later on they never got to come back and recover because they'd been deported or killed. So, that's not unusual. This is why hordes of coins are often not that archaeologically valuable, but they are fun to find. Now, what happens after the Bar Kokhba revolt is what's interesting here. Because after the Bar Kokhba revolt, the cave continues to be used. And that's what's interesting here. As the article says here, as the teams pressed deeper into the cave, they made more strange discoveries, including oil lamps wedged into the crevices of the rock, which they fished out using long metal hook. These oil lamps, we have to understand, are Roman period and post-date the Bar Kokhba revolt. And that's what's interesting here. And that's what's really fascinating about this discovery, is even though they're finding a whole lot of artifacts from a vast span of time, that focus on the Roman period is what's really what they're looking at.
Intrigued them.
It's what intrigued them. Because one of the things they discovered here is that they discover 120 well-preserved oil lamps dating to the late Roman and early Byzantine periods, so late 2nd to 4th centuries Common Era, which were collected from the cavities and crevices of the cave. Okay, so let's put that into perspective. This is after the deportation of the Jews. Okay. The Bar Kokhba revolt was a failure, and the Romans basically come in, bash some skulls, and deport the Jews out of Israel, out of Jerusalem, and spread them out across the Roman Empire. That led the Roman population to basically live in Palestine. So now at Beit Shemesh, you've got a Roman population that's taking these oil lamps, going down into this cave, and shoving them into the crevices.
Yeah, they're not in in a lot of caves, you see them actually carve out shelves on rocks.
Yeah, these are not carved in shelves.
These aren't just sat on a natural protrusion.
Yeah, they're not finding these oil lamps on the floor of the cave. These are not the results of people who just inhabited the cave, burnt an oil lamp, and camped for the night, and just forgot their lamp.
These were thought out.
These were oil lamps that were intentionally shoved into crevices, cracks in the wall of the cave. It's a very, very strange practice if what you want to do is illuminate a cave.
Yes, and the next sentence goes on and explains why.
Yeah. The next sentence of the article says, shrines or oracles to the dead were sometimes called necromantion. Okay? Essentially, a way of communicating with the dead. And it says that they were generally located in caves that had a number of specific characteristics, including natural water sources inside the cave and a deep shaft. And it says, furthermore, believers thought that this shaft led to the underworld, and that the dead could use it to rise to the surface to communicate. Now, it's interesting that they have those qualities, because this cave near Beit Shemesh fits that description to the T. It has a deep, deep shaft, 69 feet deep, and it also has a natural spring. So those attributes make it an appropriate sort of natural oracle for communicating with the dead or even for healing.
Yeah, and they just noted that the spring inside the cave at one point had collected into a pool that occurred 21 meters across.
Yeah.
So it was, these are substantial features.
Yeah, they're very substantial features. You don't find that at every cave.
No.
So the fact that we find this at this particular cave would have been very attractive to the Romans, especially those who would practice necromancy.
Yeah, so on top of it having all those features, they also found the human skulls.
Yes.
Which are not, according to this article, common in most Roman caves.
Yeah, they're not common. And they found the fragments of three skulls.
Yes, so it has the evocative statement that the cave in the Jerusalem hill has all the cultic and physical elements necessary to serve as a possible portal to the underworld.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, we do have to point out that the researchers here are making some inferences. Okay? Could these skulls have been some other thing, like a burial, possibly? But at the same time, too, those lamps shoved into the cracks are deeply suggestive. And they get into that in a moment. The article also talks about references to necromancy in the Bible and in other texts. Like, for example, they talk about the story of Saul contacting the prophet Samuel at Ein Dor, 1 Samuel 28, 7-24, which was an act of necromancy.
Not viewed favorably.
No, not viewed favorably. And, frankly, in Israelite law, punishable by death. Cuneiform tablets from Mesopotamia dating the first millennium also contain cultic texts that describe various rituals for consulting with spirits using human skulls. We also should point out, too, that the Mesopotamians did not condone this.
But it was practiced nonetheless.
It was practiced nonetheless, yeah. In the Roman period, necromancy became intertwined with the idea of human sacrifice, leading to laws against witchcraft and divination. Although it also says that necromancy was marginalized, it was still practiced, including by the emperors Nero and Hadrian. So again, it's one of those things where it's forbidden knowledge, but that didn't prevent people from doing it.
And people high in power always seem to have ways of getting that forbidden knowledge.
True. Very true. There is also evidence in the article here that says that the Jews practiced necromancy, including a skull collector, Shlomo Musaif, who purchased on the antiquities market, and we have to remember the antiquities market could have forgeries. So because it's not in C2, we can't take this as basically a bona fide artifact. But he has a skull that has a Jewish oath written in Aramaic, with an incantation against a demon. So there's that. Now, if that's a valid find, then maybe, but who knows? Again, not found in C2, purchased on the antiquities market. You don't know for sure.
Yeah, but the fact that the rabbis in Jerusalem and the Babylonian Talmud condemn the use of necromancy means that there were fringe elements practicing.
Yeah. That's from the Babylon Talmud, and it specifically says condemns the use of conjuring of the dead by the use of a skull.
Mm-hmm.
And the reference to that is Sanhedrin 65b. So it does seem to have been a practice that, even though it was condemned, continued to persist from essentially the time of the Israelite monarchy all the way through the Roman period.
And the use of a skull is fairly common sense. Substitutionary magic, we talk with our mouth, so you would have a skull.
Yeah.
That the dead could use to speak to you through.
Yeah. Now, the article then transitions to another magical practice.
This one's
interesting.
This was what really caught my attention. This was something new I hadn't heard of.
Yes.
And this is really why, while, as you said, it's speculative whether this was used as a portal to the underworld, this section we're getting into kind of says, well, it may be speculative, but they have really solid reason to speculate.
Yeah, they've got good reason to speculate here.
And that's the presence of the oil lamp.
Yes. Now, the presence of the oil lamps is likely part of the practice of lycnomancy or lampodomancy, the use of oil lamps for divination. Basically, what would happen here is magicians or prophets would basically shove these lamps into the cracks of the walls, lit, and then try to watch and interpret the shapes created by the flame, which was believed to be a spirit, a god, or a demon. So it's a kind of divination. Fascinating. This is fascinating because I haven't encountered anything like that before.
This was the first time I've heard of this practice.
Yeah, it's the first time I've heard of this practice too. And even they had not considered this. It's only when they started doing the actual dig here, they started excavating the floor and they weren't finding a whole lot, but it's only when they started looking into the cracks in the walls and started pulling out oil lamp after oil lamp after oil lamp
that they discovered this was a consistent practice, not a one-off.
Yeah. It's only long after that they sort of became aware of what the material coming out of the cave, out of the shaft, that they said, okay, this is not like other digs we've done. There's something else going on here. So this is a perfect example of an excavation that starts with the data.
Yes.
And it's coming up with this conclusion from the data.
And the article goes on to say that once they had made that connection, that oh, there's something more to this.
Yeah.
And they started saying, look, these are being used ritually, so let's start looking in all the cracks in the wall.
Yeah.
Then they started getting even more finds, even more finds,
Yeah.
even more finds.
What they found in the cracks in the wall was better than what they were finding on the floor itself. So I think that's really exciting, really interesting, and they're coming up with an interesting conclusion to this, which is that they've encountered a post-Bar Kokhba rebellion site. It's basically run by the Romans. It's using lamps and necromancy to divine the future.
And when they became aware of this, they also found texts that mentioned metal weapons that were used to ward off demons.
Yeah.
Which is another confirmation this was a site that probably involved necromancy.
Yeah, that too.
A little bit suggestive.
Of course, the skulls might be the smoking gun on the necromancy bit.
We have oil lamps shoved into walls. We have texts mentioning the weapons used to ward off demons and a whole bunch of weapons. And then, yeah, human skulls.
Human skulls.
It's not someplace.
Might be a small tip off here.
Not someplace I want to go for vacation, but it excites
Not whole
archaeology.
skeletons, just the skulls.
That's important too. Yeah.
Okay. Not whole skeletons, just the skulls.
So, this is probably a site deeply condemned by the Bible.
Yeah, probably. However, to wrap this up, if you want to visit this cave, it is actually open to the public. This is actually a cave that has been open for a long time. Now we have to state that the deep shaft where they found the lamps is not open, and that is because of the possibility of serious injury or death. This is a really deep shaft, and the shaft is closed. However, the rest of the cave is open to the public from the Passover holiday in April to Sukkot holiday in the fall. So it's closed over the winter to protect a colony of bats, which is really cool.
Really, really cool of them.
Yeah, because it shows me that this is a spot where environmentalism is coinciding with an archaeological park.
Yeah, they don't have to conflict.
Yeah, they don't have to conflict. And this is really exciting that they're doing that to allow the bats to hibernate in the cave, even though it's also an archaeological site.
So yeah, not to make things prohibited in the Bible seem really cool, but you have a cave dedicated to necromancy, complete with bats.
It's complete with bats.
Now that probably means it smells like bats.
Yeah,
so
it probably smells like bats, but you know, the bats need a place too.
Yeah, I like bats.
I like bats
are very,
too.
very cool.
Yeah, bats are awesome. Okay, so that wraps up this extra content for our members on YouTube and Patreon. I thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this extra content, and I will see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible.